It might take a little time to get used to it, but with the NFL draft behind us and what the Jets did in free agency, I think it's time to admit, folks, that this gangrene roster is absolutely loaded. I'm Glenn Naughton with JetNation Radio and JetNation.com. Be sure to log on to JetNation.com where you can register and become a part of what is the most active Jets message board on the web. I've said it before. I've said it many, many times over when it comes to general managers, whether it's Joe Douglas or any GM. I know that it's in our nature, and by our nature, I mean us as human beings, but probably more so with Jet fans. Man, do we love to complain, and who can blame us, right? There's been so much of it. But when I look at what Joe Douglas has done with this roster since his arrival, and I hear people complain about the misses, because there have been misses. There have been huge misses. There's no denying that. But I've harped on this a million times over. Everyone has their misses. Every GM, you cannot find me an NFL general manager who hasn't blown a first round pick or blown a top 100 pick or had entire drafts that contribute nothing or entire classes where guys only hang around for a couple of years because they were draft picks, but everyone knows that guy really can't play. But one of my favorite examples is Bill Parcells. Because that team, when Bill Parcells was the head coach of the New York Jets, they did a lot of winning, but not much of it was due to his drafting. His drafting was terrible. It was atrocious. But he added guys like Kevin Mawai in free agency. He added leaders like Brian Cox in free agency. He brought in guys he knew, who knew him, who knew his system, and built a team that won. Veteran quarterback, proven veteran. Although let's give credit where it's due. When they brought Vinny in, he played probably his best football with the Jets. So let's give Parcells and Charlie Weiss credit for that. But my point is, and I still hear people doing it. Oh, missed on Zach Wilson. All right, you missed on Zach Wilson. Okay. What was the fallback? Rodgers, now you overpaid. I'm not going to argue that. But if you look at this team, and we talked about this on the show a couple weeks ago, saying that once the draft wrapped up, we'd look at every team in the AFC East, and we still will, but today's just going to be focused on the Jets. Dylan and Chris busy tonight, just me, going to fly solo. They'll be back. They'll be back soon. But you look at, we'll do every team, but you just look at this Jets roster. As a fan, from keeping up, from looking at, watching free agency and knowing how guys on the team have developed, and with the draft coming, you kind of know there's a lot of good players on this team. But and I sent the tweet out a couple of hours ago. As I was getting ready for the show, I'm going through, all right, let's jot down the who's who at each, who are like the really high-end guys. How we doing, Wild Wave? Good to see you, man. Who are the high-end guys, or who are the guys that haven't established themselves yet, but we really have a chance to see them become something special. And I'm writing name after name after name after name. And I'm not talking about, I think back to the days when if the Jets had a solid starter somewhere, a guy who was okay, it was like, oh, thank God we have that guy. Thank God we got Robbie Anderson. Thank God for Brian Winters, when he was healthy anyway. There was no conversation about, does this guy belong in the top 5 in the NFL or the top 3 in the NFL? Is he top 10 or top 8? Is he the best in the NFL at his position, or is he in the top 3? There was none of that. There was none of that. You look at this roster now, starters, top to bottom. And we'll sprinkle in a couple of, guys with potential. But here's what I came up with. And I tweeted out, and people even said it. Hey, man, you're being conservative here. Some of these guys should be ranked higher. I thought you're probably right. But I'm trying not to be full on 100% crazy homer. Let's keep it honest. Let's keep it real. How we doing, Charles? How we doing, Matthias? So going down the list, key spots, key starters. This Jets team at quarterback. And again, yes, I feel like I'm always repeating that this is going to be dependent on the health of this roster. That goes for every team in the NFL, of course, but a bit more risk with the Jets because of the injury history of their left tackle. I get it. But just looking at the team they have assembled, and again with Fashanu, and we'll talk about the Fashanu pick. Being a backup and what you hope you get there if Tyron Smith goes down. But starting at the top, quarterback, you've got Aaron Rodgers. And there may be some drop-off. He had a year off. He got a year older. Maybe he won't be that top 5, top 8 quarterback. Top 10, top 12. Keeping in mind, the Jets for the past, I don't know, decade, consistently getting bottom 2 or 3 in the NFL. Like when the Jets don't have the worst quarterback situation in the NFL, it's like, whoo, man, they're pretty good this year. What are they ranked? 29th? That's great. And they've still had years where they win 7, 8 games, despite bottom of the barrel quarterback play. So in Aaron Rodgers, let's say worst case scenario, worst case, 12th ranked quarterback instead of 30, instead of 31, 32. Now, again, if everyone's healthy and everyone gels, he could be top 8. Or sorry, yeah, he could be top 8, top 5. What? But let's just say top 12 for the sake of objectivity. Then at running back, look at what Breece Hall did last year behind an atrocious offensive line and consistently having the box loaded because there was no quarterback worth respecting under center. Teams knew your quarterback can't beat us. Trevor Siemian and Tim Boyle and Zach Wilson do not scare us. We are going to load up and get after you. And plus, you had an offensive coordinator who didn't try to exploit that. Different situation this year. The coordinator will still be there by name, but Rodgers will be calling the plays or adjusting at the line as needed. So Breece Hall had just under 1,000 yards with arguably the worst quarterback and offensive line in the NFL. Now, Tyron Smith, AVT, Morgan Moses, John Simpson, Joe Tippmann, Aaron Rodgers under center. Teams are going to respect that. You think Breece Hall might have a little? Breece Hall, again, this is all dependent on health. I'm going to stop saying dependent on health. Put that in as a caveat to every comment I'm making, depending on health. Breece Hall could be the top running back in the NFL this year. And just that's not hyperbolic. That's not homerism. Just watch the guy play. He could, and he will, I will say, be a lock to be top 5 in yards per attempt, whatever. Again, Braylon Allen's here now. Are the Jets going to try to ease the workload and keep him fresh? And maybe he doesn't get as many carries as you thought. But yards per carry, I would say he is 100% going to be top 5. And you might have some guys who sneak in there, with 70, 80 carries. I mean, like regular 12, 13, 14 plus carries a game running back. He'll be number 1 in the league. Then at wide receiver, you have Garrett Wilson. And I hate ranking wide receivers. And I talked about this the other day and I explained why. There's just so many good ones. There really are. They're like right now, we're probably watching 15 future Hall of Famers play at the same time, if not more. I mean, and really maybe not, because they're going to have to start raising the bar for what it takes to become a Hall of Fame receiver, because guys are just putting up video game numbers. So Garrett Wilson, based on what we've seen from him now, I would just say elite. I can't even rank him. I can't rank him. But what we've seen from him, and I said it last year, I'll say it again this year, he could be a 1,500 yard per year receiver. He could be a 1,500 yard, 12 touchdown guy. And this offense with Aaron Rodgers, all that stuff, he could be that. The only thing that might stop him, the only thing that might slow him down is the fact that on the other side, your wide receiver 2 is the NFL leader in yards per catch over the past several seasons. And you just drafted Malachi Corley, who's going to be in the slot and see his targets. We're not going to include Corley in the conversation. He hasn't proven anything. Just for the Garrett Wilson, Mike Williams, that tandem. Wilson could be a 1,500-yard guy. Williams has proven himself to be a consistent, elite, high-level playmaker, which is how you lead the NFL in yards per catch over a several-year span. That's your receivers. So you've got a running back who was one of the best in the NFL last year. You've got 2 wide receivers. One, best big play receiver in the NFL. The other one, a guy who's putting up 1,000 yards with tomato cans playing quarterback. That's ridiculous production, given the circumstances. He's got no offensive coordinator. He's got no quarterback. He still put up 1,000 yards. So Garrett Wilson, sky's the limit there. Left tackle, Tyron Smith. All right, we know injuries. I get it. But as long as he's on the field, and when he's on the field, and, pray to the football gods, you get, 13, 14 games out of him this year. And you pray that if he's going to miss games, it comes early in the year and down the stretch he's healthy. And as Dallas did, I'm sure the Jets will have a plan in place where he doesn't play every single game, where he doesn't practice every single day. He'll have a lot of rest time, a lot of downtime. Let's see. Tell him to pull up. Getting old me. Yeah, no kidding. So there you have Tyron Smith. Then you move inside John Simpson. He is what he is. I could see someone taking that job from him at some point in the not too distant future. Joe Tippmann, second round pick, made the all rookie team. I think the interesting thing with Tippmann is it does look like the Jets are going to be going to more of a power scheme. And really that's not his strength. I'm not saying he can't do it. What I loved about Tippmann coming out was his ability to put a target on a guy and lay people out. On stretch plays, toss sweeps, things, getting outside and just laying dudes out. That I felt was Tippmann's true strength, was his ability on the move. I don't think he'll be moving as much as we anticipated. Then on the right side, you've got AVT and Morgan Moses. Now, Morgan Moses missed 3 games last year. Other than that, he played a million in a row, and all I got to hear about is how he's going to get injured because he's 33. When did 33 become 70 in the NFL? I remember, it used to be normal to say, this guy's a running back, and he's 30, 31. He's you're not going to get the same out of him. We've seen a lot of offensive linemen play at a high level into their mid-30s, 37, 38. Not a ton, but the elite. Like the best of the best, those guys will play a long time. So Morgan Moses, I'm not as worried as other folks seem to be. And again, top 10 tackle. AVT, hard to say top anything with him because he's been injured so much. But when healthy, what he has shown, what he has put on film, he's been fantastic. He could absolutely be a Pro Bowl guard. So you could be looking at a Pro Bowl guard, Pro Bowl type tackle, top 3 left tackle, and a young improving rookie all-pro, the all-rookie team center in Joe Tippmann. That alone, we're not even onto the defense yet, and I think this team has 10 players who are better than almost everyone they've had over the past decade. It's really just nuts. Then a defensive end. And when I sent out the tweet, I forgot 2 guys. And it was just a matter of me looking at the roster, seeing the first few names, realizing just what they had. And I just started typing out names, sort of spitballing, like this guy. And I hit the tweet and someone's like, hey, why didn't you include Quinnen Williams and Jermaine Johnson? Yeah, why didn't I? So I hop back on there. You got at your DNs, you got Hassan Reddick, one of the most productive pass rushers in the NFL over the past 3 seasons, over 50 sacks in the last 3 years. Jermaine Johnson, an ascending player, there's no reason to think he won't be a double-digit sack guy. And then Quinnen Williams, who's top 5 defensive tackle, could say top 3 defensive tackle. And then an outside linebacker, a guy who doesn't get enough credit. And I get it, he's only had the one good year. But Quincy Williams last year was absolutely a top 5 linebacker, maybe top 3. You look at his production, it was off the charts. His play from week 1. We said week 1, wow, that might be the best game we've ever seen him play. And if he can keep that up, he's going to be at an all-pro level. Then, of course, at the corners, Sauce Gardner, 2-time All-Pro. 2 seasons, 2-time All-Pro. That's all you got to say. It doesn't get more elite than that. I don't know that anyone's done that in the last 100 years. And then on the other side, the guy who doesn't get enough credit because of how good Sauce is DJ Reed. So those are your... And then Michael Carter, a top 5 nickel. Maybe top 3, but we'll say top 5 for objectivity purposes. So you've got Michael Carter, one of the best nickels in the league. You've got Sauce and DJ Reed, who might be the best tandem in the league. Then as you're trying to get to the quarterback, you're using Quinnen Williams, Hassan Reddick, Jermaine Johnson, and a guy I didn't mention yet, Will McDonald, I think, in terms of where you can rank him. You can't rank him anywhere. Hasn't done anything yet. But based solely on his film in college and what you saw from him last year, and if you did watch him closely enough last year, you saw improvement. You saw him getting better as the year went on. He played 19% of the snaps. I don't know how much he's going to develop with that being the case, but he did develop. He did show improvement, so I'll take it. And then, again, O-line, Tyron Smith, Joe Tippmann, AVT, Moses. And then you got Rodgers under center with Hall. And I'll tell you what, Braylon Allen behind him. Folks, if you haven't watched Braylon Allen yet, like I said, I first started watching him as a freshman at Wisconsin. And I knew right away, like, this guy's going to be, and they knew. He took 2 years of high school at the same time so he can get to college a year earlier. And he's the youngest player in this draft. I think he can be special. And then again, Wilson, And listen, Tyler Conklin, he's not Kelsey, but he's pretty damn good. If you look at his production paired with the same circumstances, no running game, no quarterback, no offensive coordinator. Conklin did a nice job last year. And that might become the one thing that prevents any, like I said earlier, Garrett Wilson, 1,500 yards. Maybe, because there's a lot of targets now. There's a lot of mouths to feed. You got Williams, you got Corley. I'm hoping Brownlee sticks, and I think he might. I think Gibson will have a little bit harder time. But again, it was, I hate to keep saying it, but with the offense last year, hard to really get a feel for what these guys do, what they do well. So, but I think we'll find out in the preseason. And then, of course, your backup quarterback, Tyrod Taylor. That was a big one. Not, the concern there with Taylor really is he's got a significant injury history. You've got Rodgers coming back off the Achilles. Like, you don't want to be in a situation where Jordan Travis sees the field. At least not, if Jordan Travis plays this year, you want it to be kind of what I said last year about Zach. If Zach sees the field, let it be the final couple weeks of the season when you got a playoff spot wrapped up and you're winning a blowout and you just want to get him on the field. That should be the only time you see him. But it's Rodgers, and it's Taylor. But the O-line should be good enough to keep guys upright. Tyron Smith, the Fashanu pick, and I get it, right? I wanted Bowers, and I did. I'm not going to hide from that. I thought, that doesn't mean I don't think that Fashanu is a good pick or a good player. I just felt there was a better option on the board in Bowers. And one funny thing, and again, making this clear, I think Olu Fashanu is going to be a very good player. But I see a lot of, oh my God, can you believe there were Jets fans that didn't want an offensive lineman with the 10th pick? Well, 11th pick. Can you believe there are Jets fans that didn't want an offensive lineman in the first round? Did they not watch last year? Did they not see what this team went through? Thank God Joe Douglas made the very obvious pick and went with a tackle, because that was the right thing to do all the way. Those people were crazy to think otherwise. Thank God Joe Douglas saw it the right way. Joe Douglas tried to trade up and take a wide receiver. That was his first choice. Joe Douglas's number one choice was add a pass catcher. And when he couldn't do that, he went to his second choice, which was Olu Fashanu, which there is nothing wrong with, because he's a very talented player at a very premium position, and he should stabilize the offensive line for many years to come. Glad he's a Jet. But the fact that I saw someone do it, I think the day after the draft, maybe it was the night of, and I had to laugh. I'm watching somebody sit there and say, Joe Douglas wanted a Dunze. Joe Douglas wanted neighbors. He would have loved Marvin Harrison. He was trying to trade up. He was offering packages. Nobody wanted to come down to 10. The Jets had to stick and pick, so they went with Fashanu. And boy, thank God, because that was the right pick. Like, as if they hadn't just explained that the first choice was a wide receiver. So really what this came down to was the Jets understood they needed another weapon to get this offense to another level. And they disagreed with those of us who felt Brock Bowers could be that guy. So that's, and again, so it's funny to see people say, they tried to get a receiver, but they couldn't get one. So they went with Fashanu, and then turn around and say, how could anyone think Joe Douglas was going to do anything but offensive line here? It was so obvious. Like, rewind your own tape, what you just said 5 seconds ago. They were trying to get a different guy who didn't play that position. But again, glad Fashanu's on board. And the hope here, obviously, is he hits the ground running. Because, and I've talked about this, I put it on the forums on JetNation earlier, we all expect Fashanu to play at some point. Like, Tyron Smith's history tells us Fashanu is going to see the field. The question becomes, when does Fashanu play? Does he play in week 3? And where it might be a concern, and you're like, damn, this guy hasn't seen enough even practice reps for us to expect him to play at a high level. This can be a concern. Or does it come in week 13 when you're like, all right, he hasn't played yet, but he's had a ton of practice time, because he's going to get a ton of practice time. It's, as I said a little bit ago, Tyron Smith in Dallas, they sat him during the week and they didn't practice him. So this means Olu Fashanu, it's a unique situation where he's going to be a backup, but he's going to be a backup who gets starter reps in practice, which could accelerate his development, which is great news. So if you need him week 7, 8, 9, so it's really, listen, Joe Douglas comes out of this looking like a genius. If Olu Fashanu has to start 13 games and he plays well, then absolute master stroke. But I guess I come back on that. I mean, I get adding him, but if you feel like there's a chance of that, I mean, you add him before the draft. It feels weird, just to say we're going to go out and get this guy, but we're only expecting him to play 3 or 4 games. That seems a little bit weird. So as Wild Wave says, yeah, JD wanted neighbors. Rome just needed to have the ammo, but Olu was the right pick. JD said we'll make the season get off track. Yeah, I get that, Wild Wave. Like I said, it's a I just view Bowers differently than the Jets do, which is fine. It's I say all the time, I don't pretend to be a GM. I don't pretend to be a coach. I'm a fan and I have opinions, and this is why we do this, to talk about the Jets with our fellow Jets fans and share our opinions. People won't always agree. People won't always disagree. The class itself, as I talked about, I didn't love not taking. I would have been, excuse me, I would have been much happier with this class if they would have used that Davis pick on an offensive lineman. That's probably my biggest thing, my biggest takeaway. I may have stayed put with some of those 4s and grabbed higher rated guys at different positions, but the Jets traded down a ton. But if I could have gotten Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia or Christian Mahogany, I know Mahogany was still there when Davis was taken. Van Pran went later. He may have been gone. I forget. But I'm sure he would have been there with some of the 4s. So I would have liked one more interior lineman. Like looking at the offensive line yesterday and the depth chart where it's at right now, it's a good conversation, right? Because as we've said, we all saw what happened last year. We all saw what a disaster it was. And it's like, how many did the Jets carry? You assume 9. They carried 9 last year. I think they carried 9 the year before. 9 is kind of what they do. I'm trying to remember if they carried 10 at some point, but I'm drawing a blank. But do you consider that if you're Joe Douglas? You say we're going to have more quality guys, and to avoid having them get poached on the practice squad, because everyone needs offensive line, we're going to keep them. Charles says they need another outside wide receiver. Yeah, well, listen, we'll get to that in a minute, Charles, about free agency. So basically, they're in a spot where, again, the class wasn't bad. I think most people, the Jets draft class, I'm not hearing anyone talk about it as their favorite, and I'm not hearing anybody talk about it as their least favorite. So they did some good things. Corley, love the Corley pick. As I said a few times pre-draft, my dream draft at 1-2 would have been Bowers Corley. Instead, it's Olu Corley, which is, again, you're getting 2 guys who you expect to be very good players for a long time. Wild Wave says Van Pran went in 3rd. Yeah, Mahogany, but Mahogany's had, I think, 2 full seasons since the injury. I feel like once you've done 2 years after an injury, I'm not as concerned about the injury. Year after, oh yeah, I'm concerned. 1 year removed, I'm still a little bit worried. You give me 2 full seasons and show you're okay, especially that late in the draft. I think I would jump on that. But needing another wide receiver, free agency. This is one thing. Oh, Atlanta. Let's touch on that real quick. I don't think I've ever heard a pick more universally hated than the Atlanta pick, Michael Penix. And even the guys they took after that, I feel like they were better players on the board. We'll know in 3 years. I don't know. It's my opinion. But the Penix thing, I heard Daniel Jeremiah say, he hated it on draft night. And after hearing the reasons why they did it and thinking more about it, he hates it even more. And it really, look, in hindsight, like a couple years past, maybe Kirk Cousins gets hurt this year. Michael Penix steps in. They win 12 games, go to Super Bowl. I don't know. That's not happening. But if something happens where Penix gets on the field earlier than you expect and his development is rapid enough that he plays at a high level, fine. But listen, I don't know how many I'd be the 10 billionth person to say it. You just guaranteed Kirk Cousins $100 million. You should be expecting him at the very least to give you 3 years. 4 in all reality, but at least 3. That's going to put Michael Penix at 27 when he finally steps on the field. And then he's going to play 1 season. And then you have to decide he's going to have 1 season of play under his belt. And then you have to decide if you're going to exercise his 50-year option, having seen him play for 1 year at that age. So many things wrong with it. They have bigger needs. They have needs on defense. There's the cat. You spent the cap money on Cousins, and now taking Penix there is going to cost him what, $9 million a year, something like that. So that's $9 million you're spending on a guy who probably won't play for 3 or 4 years. At which point you'll have to decide to exercise his 50-year option or not. And they said some things. Atlanta. Oh, this is like the Packers drafting Jordan Love. No, it's not. No, it's not. Jordan Love wasn't in his mid-20s when he was picked. And another thing Daniel Jeremiah pointed out, what could happen in that locker room if Cousins struggles a little bit. There's no goodwill, there's no equity, there's no history there between Cousins and the fans where they have 10 years of "we love you, Kurt," or Kirk, and we're gonna, we're willing to stick with you through these rough patches. They've got no history with him. And if he struggles, you might have a rift in the locker room because the teammates don't know him. The city doesn't know him. Nobody. Aaron Rodgers was a god in Green Bay. Aaron Rodgers, they would stick with him. He would have to struggle mightily for a very long time before anybody was like, oh, we need to sit this guy. With Love. But the Falcons, that doesn't exist. You didn't draft a guy who was in his very early 20s, and you don't have a guy in place who's got years and years of production and loyalty and commitment to and from the fans who are going to stick with him. So I think in every possible way, in excuse me, in every possible way, that's a bad pick. And I think I feel bad for the kid. I feel bad for Penix, right? I didn't even think of that on draft night. I may have thought about it very briefly, but I was thinking about it the next day. I thought, imagine, for whatever reason, the medicals and stuff that's slowed his progress, his career, his journey to the NFL. Imagine being Michael Penix and thinking, man, I'm finally going to get drafted, and I hope and pray I'm a first-round pick, because when you get drafted in the first round, you play right away, right? That's the way the NFL goes today. First-round picks, first-year player, that's it. He goes in the first round, and he's got to realize, oh, God, I might not see the field for 3 or 4 years. As a starter, like enter camp as a starter. So I feel bad for him. There's people that, he'll get his money. I don't care. He can cry in his money. I kind of get that sentiment, but listen, he's a human being, and he's, as an NFL football player, as a quarterback, I would expect him to be a competitor. And if you're a competitor, you want to compete. And I've said before, guys got to sit, you got to sit, wait, learn. I get all that. But normally I'm talking like a year, maybe year and a half, 2 at most. You're going to ask this guy who's, what is he, 24, 23, 24? You're going to tell him to sit down and wait 3 to 4 more years to get on the field? That's rough, man. It's got to be really bittersweet for Penix. As a rookie, I'm sure, he's not going to complain about it. But he's got to be calling his agent like, hey, man, what's going on here? Like, can you get me to a spot where I might play in the next 4 years? I don't want to see my 30th birthday before I get on the football field. So, yeah, I feel bad for Penix. Tough spot for him. Atlanta, no idea. I have no idea what they're doing there. Wanted to get to what Charles was saying about needing another outside receiver. They do need an outside receiver, because really Mike Williams, you can't count on him you don't know when he's going to be ready with the foot. They said it'll be similar to Brees, so he'll probably just be on a pitch count early in the year, and they're expecting him to be there. Corley could develop as an outside guy in time, but right now he's not that. So you do have a need there. And this is the point I was going to make. This is something I wanted to bring up. For everybody, all the people, all the fans, I've heard it a million times over, and I try to explain it, and now we're seeing it. Now we're living it as Jets fans. The Jets are arguably Super Bowl contenders. They should be a top 6-7 team in terms of like Vegas odds. They were 7 or 8 last year, and this team is better than that team was before the injuries started to pile up. So this should be a team that's top 7 or 8 to win the Super Bowl. Robert Saleh, Joe Douglas, they want to save their jobs. They'd like to win as many games as possible. They have a need at wide receiver. The San Francisco 49ers, by all accounts, are looking to trade Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel. And the Jets aren't making a move. Now, this was before the draft started. Ayuk was been on the market for a couple weeks, reportedly. And the Jets tried to get Tyreek Hill when he was available. They just tried to draft a receiver. They know they need another outside guy. Why aren't the Jets trying to make a move to get one of these guys? Could it be the non-existent salary cap? Could it be the thing that doesn't exist, that isn't real, that's only make-believe? As of right now, and this is give or take a couple million, I could be wrong, but when you project the money the Jets are going to need to sign their rookies, they've got somewhere in the neighborhood of no cap space. No, they don't have any. Ayuk is going to cost you, 25, 26, 27 million a year? And year one of that new deal, he's going to want a big number in year one. It's different when you have a veteran and you're sitting, he's in year 3, 4, 5 of his deal. You might be able to say, hey, man, let's rework the deal. Let's bring that $21 million cap hit down to 14 million and free up 7 so we can make a move here and we'll kick that money down to next year. Okay. Easier to do than in year one. Like, hey, you're leaving the place you're in because you want to get paid. You want that $25, $30 million a year deal, whatever it's going to be. But can you take $9 million this year? Like, no. Send me to a place where I'm going to get the money. And listen, not to say it's impossible. I would just say unlikely. So yeah, if the salary cap was fake, if the salary cap was just a figment of people's imagination, I would imagine the Jets would have already made a move for Ayuk or for Deebo. But the Jets, as it stands, no cap room. And I just heard someone earlier today, and I think it was about Ayuk. I think the Bills GM, I could be mistaken, but I think the Bills GM was asked if there was any interest in a guy like Ayuk. And he said something like, I got no cap space. How am I going to trade for a guy like that? And that's, again, I say it's malleable. It's there's loopholes. There's things you can do. But it's still real. The Jets like John Franklin Myers a lot. He's not a Jet anymore. And he's not gone because the salary cap isn't real. And the Jets have a need a receiver. And we haven't heard anything about them. Now, listen, please make a fool of me and trade for one of those guys today, tomorrow, whatever. There are some ways to free up some space. I don't know if there's enough. I don't know if the Jets have the ability to free up. I would think if they reworked Quinnen Williams, and then, if they reworked Quinnen Williams, and if they signed DJ Reed to a new contract, and then Hassan Reddick to a new contract, that might free up 20. But I don't know if 20 is enough to get it done. As we, said many times, teams like having that little bit of wiggle room in season. They don't want to be right up against the cap. They want to have some space to play with. So we'll see what they do there. But Devontae for Kirk Cousins by October. Ooh, what would you? Somebody actually tweeted that out not long ago. Late show. I think the cap hit for trading Kirk Cousins would be like, I don't know, $130 million or something like that, a 1-year hit. So you'd have to cut the rest of the roster basically. So I don't see that. Even Devontae, I'm trying to think if he got a new deal. No, he didn't get a new deal. He was just happy that they got a new coach. But yeah, trading Kirk Cousins would be like over $100 million cap hit. And nobody in the NFL has that type of cap room to make a move like that. So I would seriously doubt something like that would happen. Had a chance to take a closer look at some of the undrafted free agents. Not every single one of them, because I'm trying to get a good look at them. And there's a lot. There's like 14, 15 of them. Not even touching on the invited to camp guys yet. Kind of going in order here. Want to get the UDFAs done. So just talk about some of those guys real quick. Things that jumped out at me as I was watching them. Now, we talked about it after the draft. Everyone's talked about it. It's been beaten to death. Leonard Taylor, the DT out of Miami, yes, by far, he is the biggest name. He's got the chance to be the best player, like stick and actually become something. There were those, myself included, who thought he would. I mean, I thought he was a lock to get drafted. How early, I don't know, but I certainly didn't think he would go undrafted. That was one of the most shocking guys. When you see the UDFA's, or sorry, as the draft is coming to a close and you're looking at the list of who hasn't been taken yet, you see Leonard Taylor, and you're like, what the hell's going on there? Why is Leonard Taylor still out there? But he is, and the Jets got. And it's a good move for Taylor too, if you think about it. Like, you just didn't get drafted. Why not come to a team where you're going to have very little pressure, and you're going to be playing for a defensive line group, a defensive line coach who has shown that yeah, he can develop some talent, and you can, the Jets can make you into something. And as an interior defensive lineman, listen, with what teams are paying these guys now, if you can get a UDFA to be productive even for 2 or 3 years out of that spot at UDFA money, $1 million a year, that's a huge bargain. So glad the Jets went out and got him. Also, Shaheem Battle, the corner safety out of NC State. He's a guy I've seen a fair bit of because, and I've talked about this the last few years, there's a couple of schools that I've watched a ton of their games because they have a lot of players I like. We've joked on the show about my Washington State and how I watched a ton of them. NC State not far behind. Isaiah Moore, Drake Thomas, linebackers a couple years ago. Peyton Wilson this year. Watched a lot of NC State to look at these guys, and in that time, while you're watching, Shaheem Battle jumps out. Big corner, 6'2", big hitter, aggressive, not afraid to get after it, not tentative in the run game at all. Good ball skills. 25 career PBUs, if I'm not mistaken. Only had 4 last year. Excuse me. But still, 25 PBUs, so the guy can, he's got a nose for the ball, getting in there, breaking up plays. And I think Shaheem Battle, when you look at the lack of depth the Jets have at that corner spot, there's really not a lot of proven established talent there. So Shaheem Battle is a guy who also, along with Taylor, has a chance to do something there. Wolfpack had a heck of a season. They did. They had a nice year, and they got some good players. They got that running back receiver, number 10, I think. I'm trying to think. Car. Forget his. I can't think of his name. I think it's number 10. You can help me out there, William, if you happen to know who I'm talking about. But yeah, NC State defenders and some of their offensive guys, excuse me, pretty solid. After Battle, you've got Braden McGregor, the edge from Michigan. Didn't really have to watch a lot of him because I watched a fair bit of him during the season. Good player, good motor. Looked all right at the Senior Bowl. I thought he was a guy who would go on day 3. He ends up going undrafted, comes to the Jets. Same goes for him. If you're a defensive player, it's not a bad idea to come to a team that's doing a great job of developing defensive players. Brady Latham, the guard from Arkansas, I think he's a practice squad candidate. One of the starting left guard for Arkansas for several years. Played 1 game at right tackle, but that was it there. Athletic score, his relative athletic, that really jumped out at me. I didn't think he was that athletic, but 9.16 out of 10. So the guy can move better than I thought he could. That'll obviously be a positive. Trey Jenkins, safety from San Jose State, going to transition a linebacker, possibly. You would imagine, given the number of time the Jets have done that they'll look to do it again. Apologies for the raspy throat. Jenkins, great motor, covers a ton of ground. Anticipates well, reads. You see him react quickly to what's happening in front of him, and found a couple pop in the San Jose USC film, and I think literally on the first 4 or 5 plays of the game, you see him make a couple of tackles where he's covering 30, 40, 50 yards of territory from the opposite side of the field, getting through the trash, and getting to the ball carrier, making a tackle. So nice job by him. And I think Jets don't have a ton of help at safety, but I don't know that he'll see any action there. 4'6", 740, 5'11", I got to look this up now. This NC State running back, it's killing me. And I think that, again, when you're talking about the Jets, you're talking about a team that really does like doing this. We've seen them move a few safeties to linebacker, and was it Jamal Hill, I believe, the Oregon defender, which was a very similar situation. Oregon had moved him from safety to linebacker, and the Jets had him in for a visit. Jarius Monroe, the Tulane DB, good size again, kind of like along the lines of Shaheem Battle, who I mentioned a minute ago. Similar size, physical guy. 10 passes defended last year, and he was the number one corner for Jarius Monroe was the number one corner for Tulane. I think that he's when you look at the corners the Jets brought in, because obviously they spent most of their picks on offense, but they did bring in a fair number of defensive guys on the back end, and I think they may have, some of these guys are going to have a shot to stick. I think Monroe is one of them. Let's see if this came up yet. No. Let's see. Jimmy Chiarlo, the Army linebacker. Everyone's talking about him as a special teamer. Thought he looked good in pass coverage. Found a couple of their games. The All-22 was able to watch. Does a good job of, staying with his man while he keeps an eye on the quarterback, changing direction, staying with guys, in breaking routes. I saw a couple of those where he stayed in the guy's hip pocket. So he is a backup type who can play a little bit of linebacker, because everything so far has just been kind of, this guy's he's special teamer only, and maybe he will be. I don't know, but I think that he's another one. I would say if best case scenario for him is special teams and a backup, but even at this point, probably as more of a practice squad guy early on, if he even is able to do that. Lincoln Sefcik, I said it the other day, and I'll say it again. So little film on him that I'm gonna be digging more this week, trying to find some more South Alabama, because he didn't have a ton of opportunities, but I did see a couple of good plays jump out, but really, excuse me, really not enough out there on him for me to make a call. Tyler Harrell, the wide receiver out of Miami, talked about him pre-draft. There was some who thought that he could smash Xavier Worthy's 40 record, because he ran a 4.19, reportedly ran a 4.19 during a visit. During a visit to Louisville, he supposedly ran a 4.19, that's ridiculous. And he did run a 4.28 or 9 at his pro day, so he was still a sub 4.3 guy, even if he didn't match the hype of being a sub 4.2 guy, which in itself would have been nuts. Jackson Sermon, the linebacker out of Cal. Good job. Good player. Seems to be like fundamentally sound, good tackler, hits, raps. I've said this before. It's so weird that we're at a place. We're at a place with guys with the way they tackle nowadays. The fact that somebody wraps up, jumps out at you like, oh wow, this guy doesn't just throw his shoulder and try to knock people over. Like he gets down in the stance, hits, wraps, drives, and takes guys down. That's what you see with him, and that's why he averaged 8 tackles a game, I believe. Real quick, it was Concepcion. I've already forgotten what I said. Kevin Casey, Concepcion, wide receiver, running back for NC State. Really good player, electric player, somebody to keep an eye on in the coming years. And he was a big time player for them last season. Jeremy Lewis, interesting one. I've talked about this before. I always love these guys who transfer, or not who transfer, but who switch positions. When you get a player who plays one spot, moves to another, and still ends up getting drafted, like that just tells you guys a fast learner, and the ceiling's got to be pretty high. And that's the case with Jeremy Lewis. He's an ECU, Eastern Carolina tight end. Excuse me. Eastern Carolina tight end who made the switch to linebacker and picked up 143 tackles and 10 sacks in his time at linebacker there. Marshall Martin, Sacramento. I've not been able to find anything. And I imagine, as I keep looking, if I do find something on him, it's going to be a very grainy upper deck handheld home video recorder. Because that's when you get at that level, that's what, at least in my experience, that's what tends to happen. Shamar Bartholomew, Georgia Southern, ran a 4.45 at his pro day, 6 feet 200. And the number that jumped out at me, and this is where, everyone rags on PFF and talks about how useless they are. Sometimes you do get, sometimes there are some numbers that you can look at and say, okay, I wouldn't have known that otherwise. Not a bad job. Held opposing quarterbacks to 53.4% completion, along with 14 passes broken up. So to me, that's an impressive number. And that's why I have PFF. You can look up stuff like that. Agree they can use an outside receiver. Just jumping in the comments again real quick. I think for a couple late round picks, we could trade with Denver, Cortland Sutton. Again, money for a team get me to the point where the Jets, who have no cap space and very little they can do to create cap space, are going to go get a guy who probably wants a huge payday. I might have missed it, but take on the QB pick. Hadn't touched on it yet, Rich, but I love it. I mocked Jordan Travis to the Jets many times during the pre-draft process. Even had one person on Twitter to tell me to stop doing it. Stop mocking Jordan Travis to the Jets. Listen, leader, doesn't have the howitzer of an arm, but he's got a strong enough arm to make all the throws. He's just not going to get it there with the same velocity that some guys might, but he can make the throws that he needs to make. And his ability to improvise, you have to have it nowadays. It used to be special or rare to say, oh, wow, this guy can run. Well, now everybody can. And if you can't, you're in trouble. You better be Tom Brady. Because the way the game is played nowadays, you've got to be able to move. And Jordan Travis can. So protects the football, good leader, winner, can make, like I said, he can make all the throws. He's not going to make them the same way that, for example, Joe Milton. Like Joe Milton is wildly erratic, but he can throw the ball through the roof. If you put him in a dome, you're not going to get that. But I do love the pick, Rich. Yeah, exactly. We had Emery Hunt from CBS Sports on, and we were both sort of lamenting the fact that people were talking about Jordan Travis like he'd had this career-ending injury and he was never going to be the same player. It was a serious ankle injury, but he's ahead of schedule in his rehab. And guys just tend to come back a lot better than they used to with almost every injury. So it's not like a guy has an ankle and he's never going to walk again. Like I said, ahead of schedule in his rehab. Let's say the corners develop. Would you trade DJ Reed at the deadline and use that money to extend Michael Carter II? Listen, it depends on how the season's going. If you're playing great and he's playing lights out, I'm not trading him. I honestly think, and I've said this today, it's water under the bridge, so it's kind of pointless. But I said to Dylan before the draft last year, that coming up on that draft, if I could have gotten a 3 for DJ Reed, I would have done that, and I would have taken Joey Porter Jr. with my first round pick, and then you'd have Porter and Sauce as your corners, which I think would be a fantastic duo, a very young duo, and you would have had the extra. But listen, I love DJ Reed. I'm not saying I wanted them to trade him. I'm just saying I'm looking at the roster and thinking, where can you add a pick, add a premium top 100 pick, and not have much of a drop off? And that was the thing that I came up with, was if you move Reed. Now that they have him, I want them to re-sign him now. Really, bring his cap number down and extend him, because even you say if these guys play lights out, I don't see them getting enough real live reps against opposition to be able to properly judge them. Maybe the guy looks great in practice and looks great in preseason, and then you trade DJ Reed in week 6, and then you find out, oh well, this guy wilted once we got him into a real game against real starters for 60 reps a week. So that could be a different ballgame. So I wouldn't want to move Reed at this point. But I see what you mean, though, because in terms of trying to clear cap, he's probably the last guy they have that can clear cap with a move. In terms of actually moving him elsewhere. As I've said, you can clear up about $10 million with Quinnen, but that's with, obviously, Quinnen's not going anywhere, and that's with a reworking of the deal. So I would like, with DJ Reed, extend him, see if he'll take a small payday this year for a bigger one next year and the year after, with guarantees, and see if you can bring that number down if need be. All right, so that covers that. Where were we? We're still doing the free agent rundown. Al Blades out of Duke. He was a late one. He didn't sign, or if he did sign, I didn't see it on the first day. Might have been day 2 or 3 after the draft. But Al Blades, solid player out of Duke. Thought he would get drafted too. I thought he was a day 3 prospect. He ends up going undrafted. The 4.6, 4.40 is a little bit concerning, but at the same time, he anticipates well, good ball skills. Unless I'm confusing him with somebody else, I'd want to look. I think he had a bunch of PBUs, but I could be confusing him with Battle because we just talked about him having 25 of them. But let's see, Blades. I wanted to look at his size real quick because he's 6'1". I couldn't remember if he was 6'1" or 6'3". And let's see. Yeah, so he didn't have a ton throughout his career, but last year at Duke he had 10. And he did so he had 7. He had 24 in his career, but I think he played one more year. But yeah, that he's a guy, like I said, he anticipates well. Tyreek Johnson, the D lineman from South Carolina, I'm literally watching him after this pod. Didn't play a ton, so those guys are always tough to read. Eric Watts, the DN from UConn, saw him in Mobile. Didn't jump out too much. The thing I remember liking about him, did a good job of keeping his eyes in the backfield. Long arms, he got some PBUs in some big spots. He'll block up some passing lanes when opposing quarterbacks are trying to get the ball down the field. So he'll make them have to either adjust arm angle. Had 34 pressures, 23 tackles, and 9 sacks in college. But the things that jumped out at me, like I said, were the awareness, the length, and and he played with a good motor. Marcus Riley might be the most interesting one. And he is the most interesting one. Let's be honest here. This is a guy who the Jets paid. 1 second. You don't often see UDFAs get big money. And I said this on draft night, talking with Rich when he was commenting about how much UDFAs make. And I was saying they really don't. I said every now and then you might see a guy get $1 million or a couple million. So Marcus Riley, wide receiver out of Florida A&M, get familiar with him. His agent was able to get the Jets to agree to a 3-year, $2.83 million contract for Marcus Riley. So that's big money for a UDFA. I've seen UDFAs get less than $1,000. This kid got $2.83 million. Shifty, fast, makes plays after the catch. I posted a highlight of him. Who was it against? I forget now. It was against Miami when he was playing for Bethune-Cookman. He transferred to Florida A&M after Bethune-Cookman. Dude can fly. He can flat out run. He can make guys miss. The Jets, I think he'll have some work as a return man. But the Jets clearly liked him a lot if they gave him that type of cash. 2.83 for $3 million for a UDFA is a ton of money. And let's see. So what do I rate this draft? My info. I gave it a B, maybe B plus. And listen, here's the thing. And I've had a couple of people say this to me. How can you trash the Olu pick and then give it a good grade? Well, I can do that. I'm not trashing it. I just disagree with it, and I was disappointed. That doesn't mean he isn't also. Joe Douglas, I talked about it earlier. Joe Douglas was literally trying to trade up to take someone other than Olu. Doesn't mean he hates Olu. He thought there was a better path to winning a Super Bowl than taking Olu. When those got shut down, he went with Olu, who he also loves. So to me, Bowers would have been an A+, and Olu's like a B+. There's nothing wrong with that. And really, the only reason he's a B+ is because we don't know how many games he's going to play. And the way I've worded it before is, and I mean, I don't think it's that complex. Pretty easy to understand what I'm saying. The Jets drafted him at 11, and in their minds, the perfect season would be that guy doesn't take a single snap. Now, he will. I get that. But I'm saying if you're in a win now season taking a guy and you're like, man, we hope this guy doesn't play. Like, that's not a good thing. To me, your number 11 pick should be this dude is going to help us win the Super Bowl this year because he is starting from week 1 and we expect him to be a big contributor. That's what it should be. It shouldn't be if this guy has to play, we have faith in him, but man, do we hope he doesn't play. And that's where the Jets are. So that's what hurts that grade. Taking 2 running backs and only 1 offensive lineman, that's, those are the main reasons to me it's not an A or an A+. B+ draft. I'm not sure what I've seen like one or two other grades, and it's been in that range. Somebody else gave it a B. I think Kuiper gave it a B, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Whatever anyone gave it, I gave it a B, B plus. And the reason being, I would have loved to see one more. If they taken Bowers and like a Van Pran, that A plus draft for me. But more running backs than linemen, and a lineman who may not play. That's what hurts it to me. And notice what I'm saying here, because I'm talking more about the approach, and I made that clear the other day too. People get all up in arms. Oh, you can't grade a draft until so many years. Yeah, I get, but we can talk about the approach. Look, listen to what we just said about the Falcons. You just drafted a quarterback, 8th overall, and you've paid another quarterback in front of him $100 million in guaranteed money, which tells me you're hoping that quarterback you took at 8 doesn't play. And by the time he does play, he's going to be up for a new deal. And there's a very good chance that your pick number 8 ends up playing, 12, 13 games before he's due for a new contract. That's a fail. That's bad. So it's the approach. Olu Fashanu could very easily years from now be an A-plus pick. Everyone could be an A-plus pick. But looking at it for what the roster is right now, it's not like I'm trashing it. You give a grade a B or B plus. You're not saying it was a bad draft. Just saying that some things I would have done different. And there's nothing. It's weird. It's like people think you're gonna, hey, let's talk about the draft for however many months. In the case of me, Dylan, Chris, we talk about the draft all year. Yeah, go ahead and talk about the draft for a year, and then when it happens, just shut up about it. Wait 3 years to talk about it again. No, we're gonna talk about the approach the team took. And it wasn't great, but again, Marcus Riley back to the UDFA's, really good player. Willie Tyler, OT from Louisville, had some really good pass block grades. Again, PFF. Now the grading portion of PFF is where they get a little bit dodgy, a little bit. I'm not fully invested in what they're saying. His past grades were great, but he gave up a good number of sacks. But if I'm not mistaken, he gave up 6 sacks, I think, maybe 7, but 3 of them came in one game. So, okay, so you had a day where you played a guy or a scheme that just owned you and you got lit up all day. Outside of that, the numbers are much better. Like I try not to let, if there's a situation where a guy's numbers are dramatically skewed by one bad day, it's like, all right, let's take the outlier, right? That's what you do in data research, doing scientific research. You find something that's so different than everything else, you toss that aside. That's an outlier. That's not so. Was it an outlier? I mean, statistically it was, but we'll see what it means in terms of what type of pass blocker he is. Agree. Love the moves by Joe, but the O-line with so many injuries, O-line depth would have been nice. Yeah, I agree there. Corley does similar things about. Well, not Corley. Corley and Bowers are similar in that they both make guys miss, but Bowers is going to line up at H-back, and Bowers can line up in more spots. And so, like I said, perfect draft to me was get both of them. And yet, common, I get that, but Bowers doesn't line up at tight end a ton. He's a guy, you can line him at tight end a lot, 30, 35, 40% of the time. And the rest of the time, H-back, slot, outside. Let him do a bunch of different things depending on matchups, depending on what they're looking at on defense. Again, Rodgers with the ability to adjust at the line. So it wouldn't be as if, and again, it's one of those things where has Rodgers ever had a tight end as good as Bowers? Like, okay, he doesn't use tight ends a lot. Well, now he's got one that's worth using a lot, or would have had. So yeah, even I love them, but we should, I get the intrigue. I mean, I still see people who are like mad over the Bowers thing. Like, move on. There was nobody campaigning for Brock Bowers more than me, but he's a Raider now. So, I'll still talk about him, but I'm not going to be angry. Like, the Jets still got a really good player. Charles says he lives in the Atlanta area. Wanted Bowers. Also, the lineman makes sense. If the big boys go down, we'll be glad we drafted one. I agree with that, but my point was that I made it a few times, that there are still some veterans out there who, if Tyron Smith misses 5 or 6 games, a veteran could have filled in and probably been just fine. Now, listen, if he misses 13, 14 games, different story. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. But that was, that was my proposed action the whole time. Take Bowers, sign a veteran. As we said, Charles Leno, Cam Fleming, whoever, bring one of those guys in to be your stopgap if Tyron Smith gets hurt. Obviously didn't happen. Anyway, back to the UDFAs again. So Willie Tyler, some good work in pass pro. He's a Louisville product. Only got to watch one game, but like I said, I looked at his grades. Grades were good in pass pro. Watched one game. Thought he was impressive. I'll watch some more. Byron Pee Wee Jarrett out of West Florida. Big dude. It's weird, and this is why the highlight reels aren't always great, right? You'll find some footage of Pee Wee Jarrett, running guys over when he gets ahead of steam. But I saw 3 or 4 plays when he gets caught behind the line. He just crumbles. There's no because as a play is unfolding, and I see him about to get hit. You think like Ben Roethlisberger, Cam Newton, Josh Allen, these huge quarterbacks, because he is a big dude. And I see the defenders closing in. I'm like, all right, let's see how far he carries this guy, or let's see him, put a shoulder in this guy's chest and bowl over him, and just didn't. And look, I try to be aware of this at all times, especially the small school guys you don't hear a lot about. I try to remind myself when I'm watching prospects, maybe this guy was dinged up that week. Maybe this guy played hurt for 3 or 4 weeks. Maybe he's got an ankle and he's trying to stay in the game and he's, not fighting it to make an injury. I don't know. I'm not making excuses for the guy. I'm just saying I don't think it's fair for me or anybody to watch a prospect play 2 or 3 games and think, okay, well, I know, especially when you're talking about something like how hard he fights for extra yards and toughness and things like that. Jet Johnson, that's a funny one because I mentioned Jet Johnson post-draft. I said I didn't think the Jets would go after him because I didn't know that he was athletic enough. But I remember watching him a couple years ago with Mississippi State, just scrolling lists of prospects. And it's like, oh, you got a guy named Jet, perfect fit. And I watched him and I thought, good player, solid player, 100 tackles a year. Looks okay in coverage at times, not consistently good. And I just thought, as much as I would love for them to sign a guy, named Jet, I was thinking they would go for some more athletic guys than Johnson, but they brought him in, and I hope he makes it. I think that'd be an awesome story. Like I said, the Bills signed Keaton Bills, offensive lineman from Utah, who he was a guy. I think I mentioned him as a possible UDFA for the Jets, day 3 type pick. Again, if the Jets are going to run some power, like Keaton Bills is the guy you would want to do that with. That dude, he's nasty, mauler, strong dude. I would have gladly liked to see the Jets bring him in. Like Stiggers. I mean, how do you not love that Stiggers story? That's crazy. For those of you who hadn't seen it or hadn't heard the whole story, CFL Rookie of the Year last year, after playing in a 7-on-7 league, a fan-operated league where the fans vote on what play they want you to run, which is wild. And that's how he ended up in the NFL, because he went to a 7-on-7 league. The CFL noticed him. He played 1 year there, won Rookie of the Year, and he enters the NFL draft. The crazier part is, even being in the 7-on-7 league, that was a product. This is an interview he did. These are his words. His mom was online one day scrolling, and she saw a link or an ad for click here to sign up to play 7-on-7 football. And his mom signed him up for a football league, and a couple years later, he's in the NFL. That's Hollywood stuff right there, folks. That's they just have a couple of good Hollywood stories if this team wins something. Saleh, becoming a football coach because of what happened on 9/11, like working an office job, 9/11 hits, his brother's working in Manhattan. It hits him that, life is short, pursue your passion. He gets into coaching, and now he's an NFL coach. Like, that's awesome. And he's coaching in New York, where, I mean, to me, I love great stories. And Saleh, Stiggers, those are a couple of great stories. Altoona sandwich. Altoon, happy birthday, by the way, to former New York Jets great number 88, Altoon, who turned 61, I think, yesterday, and Curtis Martin as well has a birthday. So a couple of great former Jets. Altoona, you're Altooning in a little bit late. We'll let you go, everybody. we're going to wrap this one up. Jets roster is absolutely loaded. The salary cap is real. And some UDFA hopefuls. And I'll watch, like I said, I'm going to watch some more of those guys now. And we'll be with you next time. We'll hop on if there's any breaking news. But as far as I'm concerned, folks, and this was the point of my tweet earlier, is that if you look at this roster that Joe Douglas has built, this loaded roster that Joe Douglas has built, if they stay healthy and they don't win, don't talk to me about you got to fire Joe Douglas. That could be an entirely different show. Maybe that'll be next week's show. But that's why I sent that. That was the point of that tweet as I was looking at talent, top 5, top 10, top 3, top 5, top 10. And I'm thinking, and I said it last year. I did a show last year where I said, this season, this team is good enough to do something special. If they miss the playoffs, you want to fire Salah, fine. But don't talk to me about firing Joe Douglas. Then, of course, the injuries, and you can't fire anyone. So if there's no injuries this year, but also no playoff wins, I'm not firing Joe Douglas. What do you look at? Oh, Joe, this is terrible. You got 3 positions where you don't have a top 10 player. This isn't acceptable. Roster's loaded. Win some football games. Extend everybody. Win a Super Bowl.